In Alaska's vast, snow-blanketed north, the familiar drone of cargo jets vanished in an instant.
How can you lose a jetliner? How can it vanish in thin air?
Replaced by blaring sirens and eerie silence. At Ted Stevens Anchorage International, a key gateway of Pacific trade, a routine morning spiraled into chaos when a terrifying mid-runway accident forced every plane to a halt.
It's very tight-knit. Everyone is affected by this in some way, and now investigators are focused on figuring out why this happened.
Global supply chains and military flight paths froze. What cracked this vital hub and why experts are still unsettled will shock you. Here's what really happened. The crash that shut Anchorage. Minutes before sunrise, everything at Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport seemed to be running like clockwork. Snowplows were wrapping up their last sweep across runway 15. The sky was still that deep, almost navy blue color you get just before daylight. Incoming cargo flights from South Korea and Japan were spaced out neatly, about 40 miles apart, waiting their turn to land. At 5:36 in the morning, a Boeing 747-400, operated by Polar Atlantic Logistics, began slowly taxiing out from Cargo Ramp Alpha toward the start of the runway. Ground control gave the go-ahead to use taxiway Charlie, but they also warned the pilots about the bitter cold. The temperature on the ground was -9 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to mess with how quickly the plane's hydraulics would respond.
We've lost our hydraulics and feels like our pitch control.
The freighter was loaded close to 800,000 pounds, not light, but still within the safe limits for Anchorage's huge runway 15. That runway stretches 10,865 feet long and 200 feet wide, making it one of the largest in North America. Inside the cockpit, the crew had already calculated everything. They expected to lift off once they hit about 184 miles per hour. 3 minutes later, at 5:39, the control tower gave them the final clearance. The giant plane rolled into position. Its 4 massive General Electric engines roared into life, echoing off the nearby mountains. Everything seemed perfect until the sound suddenly changed. The crew heard a loud, dull bang, followed by a strange wobble. They would later describe it as like hitting a pothole at highway speed. At 168 miles per hour, the right landing gear buckled and collapsed inward. People watching from the South Perimeter Road saw the plane suddenly dip to one side. Sparks flew as metal scraped across the pavement. The right wing began dipping closer to the ground. The pilots tried correcting with the rudder, but it didn't help. The aircraft twisted nearly 90 degrees, skidding sideways along the runway for more than 800 feet. If it had stayed straight, it would have stayed within the safe zone. But because of the skid, the 12-foot wingtip sliced into a snowbank and slammed into a tanker truck that had just finished filling up a de-icer storage tank. The collision tore the aluminum tank apart, instantly releasing about 800 gallons of Jet A fuel into the air. That fuel turned into a mist and caught fire almost immediately. Flames shot up into the sky, up to 30 feet high, so bright that drivers on Minnesota Drive, 5 miles away, thought the sun was rising. Then a voice rang out over every radio tuned to frequency 121.9. Ground stop Zulu! Ground stop Zulu! Anchorage closed. A ground stop is the most serious kind of shutdown the FAA can issue. No planes can take off to that airport unless they're given special permission. Within half a minute, all departure clearances for 18 incoming cargo planes were canceled. That was a big deal, considering Anchorage averages about 138 cargo landings every day. 42 seconds after the Mayday call, Fire Station 1 had its first Rosenbauer Panther fire truck on the move, beating the emergency response time required for an incident involving something as big as a 747. Fire crews from the nearby Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson and the city's Station 18 were called in too, adding 6 more fire trucks in under 3 minutes. The trucks sped under the sky bridge that connects the north and south cargo areas, chasing a blaze so intense it melted the shiny coatings off the lights embedded in the taxiway. Captain Lucy Ramos, riding in Panther 4, saw an Airbus A320 stuck at a hold point nearby, its red beacon flashing like it was caught in the crosshairs. Radar later confirmed the distance between the out-of-control freighter and the Airbus was just 89 feet, closer than the space between bases on a baseball field. And all 160 passengers inside the Airbus were still buckled in, waiting for their taxi clearance. That terrifying near miss brought back memories of Anchorage's Christmas Eve runway disaster in 1983. Back then, a Korean Air DC-10 collided with a small Piper Navajo in dense fog. Both aircraft were destroyed, but miraculously, no one died. And in 2021, another scare happened when an Atlas Air 747 hit the runway with such force that its engine pods scraped the surface and scattered metal fragments down the exact same center line. That incident shut the runway for 4 hours. But what happened today felt different, bigger. Because Anchorage isn't just an airport, it's the second busiest cargo hub in the entire United States. Last year alone, it moved more than 3.5 million metric tons of freight. Only Memphis moved more. Even an hour-long shutdown here could throw off the entire global supply chain. But right now, nobody cared about freight schedules. The only thing that mattered was saving lives. Inside the damaged aircraft, the 3 crew members scrambled to shut off fuel pumps while thick orange smoke filled the front of the plane. First Officer Marco Silvera tried to escape using the rope on the right side, but it was so hot that the rope melted before he could even use it. They switched to the left side, slid down 10 feet to the runway, and sprinted across patches of flaming fuel. One firefighter later said he could see the crew's boot prints scorched into the pavement as fire-retardant foam hissed beneath their feet. Emergency managers at the airport followed the safety protocols like they were muscle memory. They remotely unlocked perimeter gates Bravo 5 and Charlie 7, shut off access to de-icing tanks to avoid a chemical explosion, and immediately stopped fuel flow to the pipes leading from the fuel farm near Taxiway Zulu. Within 7 minutes, fire crews had buried the freighter's nose in a blanket of thick white foam, cutting off the fire's oxygen. The tanker truck kept burning longer. High-pressure streams of JP-8 shot into the air like massive sparklers, but even that was under control by the 15-minute mark. A weather sensor later confirmed the flames at their peak had hit more than 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. As the first light of morning crept over Cook Inlet, crews walked through a field of wreckage stretching nearly half a mile. Bits of twisted aluminum, burnt cargo netting, and even a suitcase filled with Pacific Salmon Roe were scattered across the snow. The asphalt on runway 15 had taken a brutal hit. Deep gouges exposed the concrete base underneath. That part of the runway would need to be dug up and repaved. Up in the control tower, the lead controller, relying on years of emergency drills, got in touch with Seattle Center and helped reroute northbound planes to Fairbanks and sent eastbound ones as far away as Spokane. Then, he gave a clear order. Every vehicle or person within 500 feet of a hot surface was to stop moving immediately. And just like that, one of the busiest cargo airports on Earth went completely silent. By 6:01 in the morning, The emergency phase was officially over. All 3 crew members were safe, with only minor injuries. The focus shifted from saving lives to securing the site. But the damage was unforgettable. The arc of flame cutting across the white snow. A jet full of passengers parked dangerously close. A massive crater in the runway. Those images would soon fuel a full investigation, force major repair decisions, and spark tough questions about how to build more resilient infrastructure. For the first time in decades, the airport that keeps Alaska and much of the Pacific Rim moving had been brought to a terrifying, grinding halt. The ripple effect. When Anchorage's runway went dark, it wasn't just one airport closing. It was the main artery of the global air cargo network suddenly choking up. Within minutes, the supply chain that moves about 1 out of every 6 pounds of international freight bound for the United States began to seize. On an average Monday, this single airport handles more than 500 heavy freighters each week, well over 8,000 flights every month. These jets stop just long enough to top off their fuel before blasting off to hubs like Chicago, Memphis, or Louisville. But the moment Anchorage went offline, dispatchers at FedEx, DHL, UPS, and over a dozen Asian cargo carriers scrambled. Their only choices were painful: take off with an extra 80,000 pounds of jet fuel, which cuts into how much cargo you can carry and slashes profits, or divert 3 to 4 hours south to Los Angeles, Seoul, or Tokyo and pray for an open ramp spot. Just before the shutdown, Xeneta's May 2025 data showed trans-Pacific rates hovering around $1.10 per pound. That means the roughly 20 million pounds of freight that cross Anchorage every 24 hours represent nearly $50 million in goods stranded in mid-air. The cost landed hard. A single Shanghai to Chicago rotation skipping Anchorage burned through about $35,000 extra dollars for fuel and crew time alone, before even counting storage fees. Ground handlers like Swissport and WFS regularly charge up to 45 cents per pound per day if cargo misses its pickup window. With 10,000 short tons of freight backed up, about 20 million pounds, the daily tab for penalties, overtime, and spoilage can soar toward $50 million. And that's not hypothetical. Air cargo insurers saw the same figures when Hurricane Irma forced mass diversions back in 2017. The worst blow landed on the perishables trade. Anchorage is the critical link in Alaska's entire seafood economy. Places like Bristol Bay, Kodiak, and the Aleutians rely on southbound freighters to carry out massive hauls of sockeye salmon, black cod, and snow crab to markets in Seattle and Tokyo. Those same planes bring back crucial northbound cargo, pharmaceuticals, electronics, and critical health supplies. The Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute warns that just a 10-degree Fahrenheit increase above freezing can cut the shelf life of fatty fish in half. With no charters available, thousands of pounds of premium sockeye sat stalled in temperature-controlled containers at isolated coastal canneries. At Tokyo's Toyosu market, which replaced the old Tsukiji market, buyers were forced to pay about 12% more for salmon in just 2 trading sessions. That's the exact same price surge recorded after Typhoon Hagibis shut down Narita Airport back in 2019. For people living across Alaska, the crisis hit even harder. Anchorage might be the economic center, but nearly 2/3 of the state's communities can't be reached by road. The COVID-19 pandemic made that brutally clear when Raven Air, the largest rural airline, collapsed. Since then, even life-saving items like insulin or antibiotics have had to move by bush planes on charter routes. According to the Yukon-Kuskokwim Health Corporation, a single insulin or medevac flight can cost as much as $1,000. without any airport shutdown to begin with. With Ted Stevens Anchorage closed, emergency flight requests doubled. Clinics in towns like Antioch, Bethel, and St. Mary's blew through a full week's supply of medicine in only 72 hours. By the third evening, grocery stores in remote towns like Kotzebue and Unalaska had empty shelves. No lettuce, no eggs. Repeating the exact scenes locals witnessed, the shutdown also hammered the city's hotel economy overnight. In a normal June, hotel occupancy near the airport averages about 85%. That's mostly due to international cargo crews rotating through their mandatory rest breaks. But with airlines now diverting their crews to Seattle and Vancouver instead, occupancy at the three biggest hotels near the Anchorage airport dropped to nearly 50%. Hotel managers told local reporters it felt like a sudden low season that nobody saw coming. Restaurants, taxis, and local shops immediately saw their business dry up. But the crisis didn't just touch commerce. It also disrupted national security. The 11th Air Force relies on KC-135 tankers stationed at Anchorage to refuel F-22 fighters patrolling the Gulf of Alaska. When the runway shut down, those tankers had to shift 620 miles southwest to Cold Bay. That airstrip is normally used for tracking volcanic activity, not launching military missions. The move added over 90 minutes to the standard Pacific Intercept patrol. It also left less fuel wiggle room for jets tasked with watching Russian bombers moving along the Far East corridor. That wasn't just a hassle, it was expensive. Every alert out of Cold Bay costs around $60,000 extra in fuel, ground equipment, and living expenses. Those costs hit NORAD's readiness budget directly. Back in the cargo world, the ripple effect hit shipping prices fast. Freightos reported that just 2 days after Anchorage shut down, rates for shipping from China to the U.S. climbed above $5.57 per kilogram, about 20% more than the month before. Major cargo companies pulled old planes out of storage in the desert to try and catch up. But small and medium businesses weren't so lucky. Amazon even had to post a warning, telling customers that its Prime deliveries could take up to 5 days across half the western United States. It was a repeat of what happened in 2021, when a lithium battery fire at Shenzhen Airport caused weeks of delays. The backup wasn't limited to airports either. Rail hubs over 1,000 miles away started to feel the pressure. Chicago O'Hare, which already struggles with cargo congestion, suddenly had to deal with surprise charter flights being rerouted from Anchorage. Freight handlers said those unplanned flights needed special parking space and took an average of 3 days to fully unload. In Los Angeles, ground crews were forced to stack cargo containers 6 units high. That made it take 2 extra hours just to pull one shipment out. Forwarders even began warning clients that airport storage fees could end up costing more than the flight itself. UPS's cargo rates show why. After the first 2 days, they charged 10 cents per kilogram per day. Every change in flight plan also meant burning more fuel and pumping more carbon into the atmosphere. A report by GTEX says that cargo jets can carry up to 100,000 pounds more paying freight when they refuel in Anchorage, rather than taking off already full. But with that refueling stop gone, each flight had to swap the weight of about 4 full-size SUVs in fuel for what would have been valuable cargo. According to the Environmental Defense Fund, this added around 9 metric tons of carbon dioxide per diverted flight. That might sound small, but when it's happening on hundreds of flights a week, it becomes a massive environmental hit and a serious problem for companies trying to meet green targets. By the 4th day of the shutdown, experts were already saying that the disruption rivaled the chaos caused by the Suez Canal blockage. Except this was in the sky. Anchorage ranked third in the world by cargo weight in 2023, even ahead of Shanghai's Pudong Airport. It handled about 3.45 million metric tons of goods last year alone. And unlike ships, which move slowly and can afford days of delay, air cargo often includes products that are high in value and extremely time-sensitive, like microchip masks, vaccines, and specialized machinery. Most factories keep only about 3 days' worth of parts in stock, so even just 2 days of flight delays forced manufacturing plants in cities like Austin and Guadalajara to pause production. They were left waiting on critical electronics stuck somewhere over the Pacific. There's no way to predict exactly when another Arctic airport will grind to a halt. But if there's one thing that this mess made clear, it's this: when Anchorage, the world's most important refueling point for air cargo, goes offline, everything gets pushed back. Engineering behind the crash. Less than 12 hours after the crash, investigators pried open the scorched landing gear bay and found a problem hiding in plain sight. A stainless steel hydraulic line, responsible for sending pressure to the right main gear's side stay cylinder, had split nearly 3 inches down its length. That kind of tear doesn't happen by accident. FAA metallurgists quickly spotted a pattern of river marks along the fracture, clear signs of brittle failure. It happens when metal that's been sitting in freezing cold suddenly gets blasted with heat. In this case, the aircraft had been parked in minus 15-degree air for about 90 minutes. But during the takeoff roll, brake heat pushed the wheel well temperature past 300 degrees in under 2 minutes. That 130-degree swing far exceeds the 50 degrees per minute safety threshold seen in cold weather gear studies, including a Boeing 757 incident in 2018. The second the System B hydraulic fluid drained out, the actuator lost all its strength. At takeoff speed, the side stay folded in like a pocket knife, and the 8-foot-tall gear smashed into the runway. But the surface it hit wasn't as even as it looked. Engineers had laid this runway in the late 1990s, and over the years, maintenance teams suspected it was settling. After the crash, they finally brought out full field LiDAR scans as part of a 2024 winter study. The scan covered more than 9,000 feet of runway 1533 and revealed tiny heave pockets, half-inch ridges caused by thawing permafrost. These frost boils happen when ice beneath the pavement melts and refreezes, pushing the surface up and leaving a gap underneath. Satellite radar data confirms similar bumps forming all across central Alaska. While a half-inch bump doesn't seem like much from the cockpit, it's a serious problem for a 200-ton jet. As soon as the wheel left the center line by just a few inches, that ridge amplified the stress, right at the worst possible moment. The deeper issue is that permafrost, once stable, is now shifting faster than crews can adapt. A 2023 report, updated in May 2025, estimates thaw-related damage to Arctic roads, rails, and airports could reach $276 billion by mid-century if emissions don't change. Alaska alone could face costs between $37 and $51 billion, nearly double what experts projected just 5 years ago. Anchorage's winter maintenance budget now tops $22 million a year. Still, scans show over 300 seam cracks in need of repair before the next freeze-up. So, what's changed? The weather, specifically freeze-thaw swings. FAA data confirms that even smaller airports across the country are seeing more damage from shifting temperatures. But Alaska is taking the hardest hit. In January 2025 alone, the state logged 22 distinct freeze-thaw cycles, 60% more than what was normal in the 1990s. Every time water gets into pavement cracks, freezes, and expands, it slowly breaks the surface apart from the inside. After the crash, samples taken from the runway showed the pavement's strength had dropped by up to 15% compared to original construction values. That loss in rigidity made the gear strike even more destructive. What makes all of this more frustrating is that both the aircraft and the runway had passed inspections less than a week earlier. The landing gear strut had cleared its 3-day checks, including visual and borescope tests. But cold fatigue doesn't follow the same timeline as warmer environments. Airbus data shows that at temperatures below -10 Fahrenheit, cracks in steel can grow 5 times faster. That means a hose that looks fine on Monday could be dangerous by Friday. Inspectors are now reconsidering how often they run ultrasonic scans that detect hidden cracks smaller than a human hair. Runway checks weren't any better. FAA guidelines call for a full pavement condition review every 3 years on runways like this one. But the only method sensitive enough to detect tiny frost boils, laser profiling, wasn't added to the standard procedure until late 2024. That left a window where the surface looked perfect on paper but hid dangerous ridges. In April 2025, Alaska's pavement report rated 9% of its runways as poor or worse. Anchorage's micro-heaves didn't show up in those scores, but they were just as dangerous. When a plane is moving at 170 miles per hour, even a millimeter-scale bump can throw off everything. All these failures, an unseen hydraulic flaw, a hidden ridge, and a shifting climate, came together in just a few seconds after takeoff speed. The landing gear was designed to handle half the plane's static weight, plus a safety margin. What it wasn't built for was a hydraulic line cracking at the exact moment the tires struck a frozen hump caused by unstable ground. The NTSB calls events like this Swiss cheese failures, where every layer of defense has holes, and when they line up just right, disaster slips through. Rebuilding the Arctic runway. Since the crash, Anchorage hasn't just been patching up pavement. It's been rethinking what it means to run a world-class air hub at 61 degrees north. And this time, they're rebuilding with the kind of precision that makes sure a single collapsed gear never again knocks out a major piece of the global supply chain. The first round of funding came from the Federal Airport Improvement Program in fiscal year 2024. More than $6 million in grants, normally spread across the state, were redirected to Anchorage, focused on fixing runways and buying heated snow removal gear custom-built for Alaska's brutal winters. Crews took advantage of the break in traffic to cut trenches alongside runway 1533 and install a new glycol recovery system. This setup vacuums up de-icing fluid before it can seep into Cook Inlet. The tech was borrowed from a $200 million cold storage facility already running on the airport's south campus. After that, field engineers milled down a 400-foot test section of runway to the rock base and paved it with a new kind of polymer-modified asphalt. The mix is enhanced with nanographite, basically a commercial-grade cousin of graphene, and lab tests show it holds up 25% better under extreme freeze-thaw cycles. But new asphalt alone isn't enough. Rules are changing too. In June, the FAA's Alaskan region released its latest study on terminal airspace and procedures, called AETAEPAS. It adds human oversight to every winter weather alert generated by the automated NOTAM system and introduces a brand new Arctic aeronautics curriculum. That means U.S. pilots will now be trained on things like frost heaves and whiteout illusions, right alongside normal takeoff and landing speeds. Starting this fall, every heavy jet leaving Anchorage will need a signed paper checklist from both the dispatcher and the cockpit crew before pushback. It's a low-tech safety net meant to catch any mismatched data before the wheels even start rolling. To power those decisions with real data, fiber optic strain sensors were embedded underneath the new asphalt. These tiny glass fibers track pressure, temperature, and micro-cracking in real time. The Coolest Ramp project manual even lists the FAA's fiber optic systems engineer on its emergency contact list. When wheels hit that runway, the data gets sent instantly to a cloud-based dashboard, giving maintenance teams hours, not weeks, of warning when something shifts beneath the surface. A separate request for proposals issued in March will expand this system to 15 smaller airports across the state, under a $1 million pavement monitoring upgrade. Winter operations are also going autonomous. A new pilot program under Alaska's 2025 Winter Storm Efficiency Study is rolling out 6 remote-controlled snowplows, guided by LiDAR and GPS, to clear a 9-acre apron without anyone in the driver's seat. To support those plows, Anchorage is fast-tracking a 40,000-gallon super bay where de-icer can be reheated, recycled, and loaded twice as fast as before, cutting down the time glycol trucks spend on icy taxiways. All these upgrades now have to stand up to a tougher insurance market. Willis Towers Watson's latest report shows that Arctic airports are seeing 10 to 15% premium hikes, with extra surcharges tied to the number of freeze-thaw swings. That financial pressure is already reshaping airline routes. Hawaiian-Alaska Cargo has launched direct routes between Seattle and both Tokyo and Seoul. Vancouver is now working with Cathay Cargo to offer backup options if Anchorage ever goes offline again. That growing competition means Anchorage has to prove it's not just close, it's reliable. Resilience is now something Alaska is teaching. The Western Alaska Airport Resiliency Study laid out best practices for cold mix asphalt, concrete embedded with sensors, and emergency backup plans. Within 6 months, those guidelines were already being taught in classrooms from Fairbanks to Seward. The University of Alaska Anchorage added an Arctic Runway Systems certificate to its aviation maintenance program, and AvTech now trains students in cold weather aircraft repair and emergency crash response. According to the state's Education Commission, enrollment in aviation programs is already up by 1/3 since the year before the crash. Students are now learning on mock-ups that include the exact hydraulic line that failed during the accident, turning one moment of failure into a permanent lesson. The real-world payoff arrives this September. Once the final surface grooves are cut and centerline LED lights are installed, maintenance crews will run continuity checks on the new fiber optic network. And almost 1 year to the day since Anchorage went dark, a snow-white Atlas Air 747-8 will taxi into position for takeoff. Its nose wheel will pause on a runway that stays warmer than its surroundings, thanks to buried heat pipes, and silently sends its structural status to a server miles away. When those throttles open up and the aircraft surges toward the Pacific, the pressure will register as a clean spike on the graph, a sign that Anchorage didn't just fix what broke. It built something stronger, something ready to bend, not break, no matter what the next Arctic winter throws its way. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video.